Fragrance seasonality, is it even something you're supposed to be paying attention to? Hello, welcome back to Seldomly Often. I'm Daniel, today we're talking fragrances, and this is FragTalk episode 4, the more free-form, open-ended podcast-style format that allows me to cover various fragrance topics and life updates, stuff that wouldn't necessarily normally fit in my usual videos. Today's main topic of conversation is fragrance seasonalities. Is it even something that we're supposed to be taking into account when choosing a fragrance to wear for the day? While discussing that, I also want to bring in topics such as a collective imaginary and going a little bit deeper in the concept of fragrance tone range and the weight of a fragrance. All these topics together, this whole conversation, hopefully will allow us to better understand fragrance seasonality and to better apply it as a notion. But before we start, let me just remind you how FragTalk works. Each episode of FragTalk is divided into 3 segments, the first of which is basically a fragrance rotation update video where I showcase a couple or a few fragrances that I like, stuff that I've been wearing a lot lately. Second section is usually a Q&A section where you can submit your questions via comments down below. By the way, if you want to submit a question, just mark your comment with Q&A. This section is also where I give you some life updates. As a matter of fact, today's second section will be completely dedicated to my report of Exence 2025. The third section is basically the meat and potatoes of the episode. It's where we discuss the main topic of conversation. As I said, today it's fragrance seasonality. All right, let's get going, starting off with the fragrance rotation section of the video. In today's video, I'm going to be showing 3 fragrances that I really been wearing a lot and I've been really liking. The first of which is probably the highlight of the section. We're talking about Clean Suede by Etat Libre d'Orange. This fragrance was a complete surprise. I got this relatively recently. I received it at the end of January or at the start of February. I didn't really know what it was, but you guys kept recommending it and it seemed to be very much loved online, and also Personalized completely loves this fragrance, so I decided to blind buy it. And when I got it, I was pretty open-minded. I gave it a couple wears and I was completely blown away. This is an amazing fragrance. It's so incredibly masculine. It's so incredibly simple in concept, but also it just wears so perfectly. This is easily one of the best things I put my nose on recently. It's so good, in fact, it matches my skin chemistry so much, it matches my vibe so much that it could probably consider even making a signature scent. It's that good. If I were to only wear this basically for the rest of the year, I would probably be content. It's just so beautiful. It has the perfect combination of masculinity because it has this very beautiful leather and woody aspect, but also extreme wearability. It wears light, it wears airy, but still very potent, very punchy. I like this a lot. It's absolutely incredible. And recently, it's been actually the only fragrance that I really gravitate towards, that I really feel like wearing, that I just can't wait to wear. If you're not familiar with Clean Suede, this is basically a rebranding of Tom of Finland. The juice is the same, the fragrance is the same. Probably the licensing with the brand expired. Tom of Finland is a very particular brand and it perfectly suits the tongue-in-cheek humor of Etat Libre d'Orange. Again, this has really caught me off guard. Absolutely amazing stuff. I'll be wearing a crap ton of it in the following months. And also tying into today's main topic, this is an absolutely gorgeous 4-season wear. The second fragrance that I want to showcase, and it's another one that I've been really enjoying, is Amouage Purpose 50. Yes, I got the bottle. This is basically my replacement for Amouage Purpose. I got rid of that bottle a while back, so much so that it didn't make even my Amouage ranking list, and a lot of people were asking me about that. The reason why I got rid of Amouage Purpose was a very silly one. The bottle was basically a little bit messed up. So Amouage Purpose has this like green finish, which is kind of painted on. In my bottle, I got it secondhand in a trade, by the way, a while back, was featuring a lot of like chips on it, and I also didn't have a box. And every time I picked it up, that was a sour reminder that Purpose was my only flawed Amouage bottle without a box. I know it's super silly, it's super shallow, but when it comes to Amouage, I'm very OCD. I like to keep things with the same font, as I mentioned various times. And at the tail end of the year, I actually wanted to repurchase Purpose, but I started hearing rumors about Purpose 50, so I held out and I got this instead. It's very similar to the original Purpose. The vibe is exactly the same. It's a little bit smoother, it's a little bit better tailored wear experience wise. I still have a little bit of a decant of the original Purpose, which I kept just because I wanted to wear it while I didn't have the bottle anymore. This one here basically fixes any issues with the original that I had. The original was a little bit too aggressive, too sharp, too pungent, a little bit too moldy. This one rounds all the sharp edges off, making for a little bit more of a pleasurable wear experience. If you're a fan of that pungent, aggressive nature of the original, this one here is not for you. I also want to mention that the projection and sillage of this is much more subtle compared to the absolutely nuclear original. Overall, I'm pretty happy about this. I like it. I'll be wearing it a lot. I'll be bringing you a full review as usual. maybe in a month or maybe something like that. I really have to get more wears in it to properly compare it to the original. I'll wear it side by side, and yeah, I'll bring you a full review when I'm feeling comfortable with it. The last fragrance that I want to showcase has been my scent of the day today and yesterday. I've been wearing this because it's been so sunny, warm, and beautiful. It's basically been teasing spring here. I know it's not over. Winter here up in the mountains lasts for a very, very long time, but nonetheless, this fragrance always puts a smile to my face. We're talking about Acqua Viva by Profumum Roma. This is one of the more beautiful citrusy fragrances in my collection. It's definitely the longest lasting though. This is basically a very incredibly straightforward lemon fragrance. That's about it. It's so straightforward, in fact, that it's almost a smell and not even a fragrance because there's not really much nuance to it. Yes, it dries down to a little bit of a woody facet, a little bit of a vetiver, and it kind of reminds me in a very, very vague way of the deepest dry downs of something like the Aventus DNA. But first and foremost, this is a pure lemon fragrance. And when you first spray it on, you might get a little bit of a cleaning product type of vibe, especially if you have that scent association. I don't really, but every now and then when I smell it, I'm like, hey, maybe someone is cleaning like the kitchen counter or something like that. But it's very, very faint, and overall, this is a beautiful, realistic lemon. It's so realistic that it feels like you're just handling lemon peel or lemon rind and just kind of like popping off those oil pods. It smells exactly like that. It's absolutely gorgeous. I absolutely love wearing this. It's so invigorating, so energizing. It's not as refreshing as some other citruses like Cedro di Diamante by Peri Monte Carlo, or even stuff like Eau Givrée by Hermès. Those are a lot more fresh, they're a lot more volatile. In order to have a citrus last long, it has to be a little bit more dense and oily, and this is exactly what it is. Absolutely amazing. I love Profumum Roma. I love their simple takes, and I think that recently I've been gravitating towards a lot more simple scents overall. I guess I just like the simplicity of a very well represented ingredient. Okay, on to the second section of this episode, usually dedicated to the Q&A, as I said. But today it's going to be all about a life update. I'm going to be telling you about my experience in Exence 2025. These last days I was actually debating whether to cover the topic or not, just because this Exence experience has been quite different from what I was expecting. Maybe I was biased by all the hype and all the videos that I've watched from the previous years. Again, I've never been to Exence. This was my first year. Maybe I underestimated the scope of the expo. That place is absolutely massive, but for the most part, it's my fault. I badly organized my trip. So I decided to dedicate only one day to Exence. I basically decided that I would only go to Milano on Saturday, and that I would do everything on that day. In the grand scheme of things, I live pretty close to Milano, so I thought that I could pull this off in one day, basically avoiding to take any sort of vacation days from work. So Friday evening after work, I basically arrived as close to Milano as possible so that I could start my day very, very early and very close. As I mentioned the last time I talked about Exence, this year I decided to go with Marcelo's group, the niche fragrance collector, and Kevin, the owner of Libertines from Australia, from Melbourne. They organized and scheduled a beautiful experience, basically a full day packed with things to do, even including the meals, which ultimately left me with absolutely no time to experience Exence on my own and to see the brands that I wanted to see. So I arrived in the rainy Milano Saturday morning. I met with a group at Exence. We standed in the queue for entrance, which by the way was absolutely massive. I think that the queue was way longer than any of us was expecting. There was an absolute crap ton of people, all of them queuing to enter this immense expo. When we finally got in, we had to follow a very strict plan because Marcelo and Kevin basically had organized a tour with specific brands that they are familiar with that they wanted to showcase. Off the top of my head, we went to Gritti, Cajal, Mihan Aromatics, Francesca Bianchi, Spirit of Dubai, maybe a few others. I think that we topped it off at like 6 to 8 brands, but that's not much considering that there were basically like 400 exhibitors there. So I was a little bit left hanging in that regard. But again, it was a very, very tight schedule. We were there only for 2 hours because we had other stuff to do. We left Exence basically around lunchtime. We went across the street to eat, very nicely organized. Then we basically had a private session with Fragrance du Bois in a hotel suite. And we went up there and we basically got introduced to the whole repertoire of fragrances. We could sample everything, we could try out everything, and there was even a possibility to purchase at a discounted price. I have to say that this event was incredibly well organized. organized, it felt luxurious, it felt exclusive, but ultimately Fragrance du Bois is not necessarily my brand. We sampled all of their offerings, or at least I did, which was good because I got a lot of the stuff in the database, but ultimately it's not a brand that really appeals to me. None of the fragrances really stuck out. I actually think that the fragrance that impressed me the most was Cannabis Blue, which is basically a weed fragrance. It smells so realistically like weed, and again, I'm not a weed user, but that was so intense and realistic that I was like, wow, they actually make this thing. Anyway, Fragrance du Bois is a brand that I might lean a little bit more into. I am getting Secret Tryst soon in a trade, by the way. I have to admit that the fragrances smell good, but they're just not for me. They're way too likable, way too safe. I'm more into weird wears. I'm more into edginess. Those are designed to be mass appealing. They're designed to be as likable as possible. And to be completely honest, we were given the opportunity to sample like 15 to 20 fragrances over the course of 2 hours. They all kind of smell similar. They have a very common DNA. Again, very mass appealing, very sweet, very, I don't know, just very, very safe. Not my thing. I respect everyone who likes Fragrance du Bois. They're just not my brand. And you might have heard me mention Siberian Rose, like in my fragrance options. I have that, I like it. But overall, again, it's very, very likable, very safe, a very, very easy wear. Fragrance du Bois is just not for me. And if you like Fragrance du Bois, I fully respect your opinion. I'm happy for you. It's just not a brand that speaks to me. So to each their own, I guess. After Fragrance du Bois, we went to another hotel for another exclusive brand experience. This one here was with the brand of L'Absolu. I have to admit that prior to receiving the schedule for the day, I've never heard about the brand. It's a brand that actually really ended up surprising me to the point where I purchased 3 bottles. It's definitely not your modern typical brand that really revolves around flashiness, on beast mode fragrances, on punchy scents that are mass appealing. It's a traditional Italian brand that basically focuses on single ingredient fragrances, kind of like Peri Monte Carlo, kind of like Santa Maria Novella. This one here, Nespolo, is one of the fragrances that I purchased. This is a very beautiful fruity apricot-y fragrance based on the fruit Nespolo. And I also got Ambra Grigia, which is based on Ambergris. And I also got Salvia Bianca, which is based on sage. Again, very, very similar. Let me just pick these up. So Ambergris is this one here. We have Nespolo, and then we have Salvia Bianca. These are very simple fragrances, incredibly straight to the point. No real transition or evolution in the scent profile. Longevity is also kind of hit or miss. They're just really beautiful representation of the one ingredient. And I kind of applaud that. I'm kind of in the mood for that lately. And especially the Ambergris one, given how much of a fan of the ingredient I am. That is basically a fragrance that I can just throw on, not really think about it. It's a really nice break between heavier fragrances. It just gives a no frills wear, you know, really nice, really elegant, really simple. Simple is the name of the game here. So if you're looking for more transitioning, more evolving, more complex, more storytelling fragrances, these are absolutely not that. When it comes to pricing, I feel that these are relatively fair. A bottle like this, which is 120 ml, comes in at 190 euros. You might think that that's expensive, and I do partially agree, but given how unique the place is, how uniquely these things are put together, and how realistically they feature that one note, and by the way, the experience at the hotel was absolutely amazing. We could smell all the raw ingredients, we could smell all the fragrances, we could actually see them put together the fragrances themselves because they really prepare them on the spot. Really cool, and I think I was actually sold on the experience itself. I really wanted to make a purchase tied to that day, to that event, to those memories, and just to the experience as a whole. It was really, really pleasant, and I have no regrets buying these 3. So yeah, I'll be wearing them a lot. I'll be spraying them liberally just because they're 120 mls and they're very, very light. They're a great break between the heavier fragrances that I have, and I can't wait to wear these. This one here specifically is absolutely gorgeous. Nespolo represents perfectly the memory that I have of a tree that we had in our garden when I was a kid, and I used to walk up to the tree and I used to even eat the fruits, and this is exactly that. It's really, really magical. I really enjoy these. After the experience with L'Absolu, we went to dinner, again, beautifully organized by Marcelo and Kevin. The whole experience with Marcelo was absolutely amazing. Again, incredibly well organized. I met the best people ever. The group was amazing. I really want to salute everyone from the Exence group. I know that a lot of them have already previously been watching my videos. That was an amazing experience, and I met so many cool people, and we're still keeping in touch on the WhatsApp group. It's just really, really cool. I love this aspect of fragrance. Meeting new people, expanding expanding the community, sharing new ideas, just talking to people and making friends. It's absolutely amazing. And if it wasn't for this channel, I'm not really sure how much I would have hung on to this hobby. Maybe it would have dropped off already. It's just really cool. It's really cool interacting with you guys in the comments. It's just really cool in general. I feel blessed to have such a beautiful community around me and just so many creators out there that really deserve views and that really deserve likes. So yeah, overall, just to close off this section, my 2025 Exence experience, although maybe not necessarily exactly what I was expecting it to be, proved to be absolutely amazing. I had a wonderful Saturday. Marcello and Kevin perfectly organized the day. Everything was absolutely high class and top notch. I'll definitely be doing it again next year, except I'll be planning it a lot better, maybe taking 2 days prior just to visit the fair for myself, just to visit the expo and to visit the brands that I like. If you're thinking about or interested in going to Exence next year, please plan ahead. Plan properly. It's a massive expo with tons of exhibitors. And even if I had more time on Saturday, there was no chance in hell that my nose would have kept up with all the brands that I wanted to sample, with all the fragrances that I wanted to sample. You need to allocate maybe 2 to 3 days. And yes, technically the only day designated to the public was Saturday, but basically everyone was buying tickets and entering the other days. And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing next year. All right, time to jump into the main topic of conversation for today's episode, the meat and potatoes of the episode, if you want. Today's topic of conversation is fragrance seasonality. So what do I mean when saying fragrance seasonality? Basically, it's the concept that some fragrances are designated to a season specifically, and that cannot be worn outside of that season just because it would feel out of place. Obviously, you're smart enough to understand that this is all BS. You can really wear whatever you want, whenever you want. The reality is that especially on YouTube, but also on Profumum and Fragrantica, we're constantly being bombarded by lists according to season. The best 10 fall fragrances, the best winter fragrances, the best spring fragrances, etc. By the way, be prepared for the best spring fragrances to come up soon. Anyway, we're kind of conditioned to think that fragrances are tailored to a specific season and that we have to rotate out and rotate our fragrances almost like a wardrobe. The wardrobe comparison is actually really interesting because both fashion and fragrances basically rotate with seasonal trends. The difference is that wardrobe has an added functionality of keeping you warm or cool depending on the temperature of the outside. Fragrances don't really do that. They may aid to the sensation of warmth or coolness, but they don't actually climate control your body. So we end up wearing basically what feels appropriate. And discarding fashion and trends, what feels appropriate to us is actually tied to the concept of culture and not association. What I mean by this is that according to where you live in the world, according to what the culture is around you, you may associate a specific season to specific imagery and vibes. In this case, we're talking fragrances, so fragrance notes. So for example, I might associate summer to citruses, I might associate summer to fresh mintiness, I might associate summer to fresh ozonic vibes. In the same way, I could be associating winter to more woody, warm notes like ambers, like vanillas, like gourmands. And this is fairly natural. It just occurs in our lifetime just because of our experiences. And our experiences are actually all wrapped up in something called the collective imaginary. The collective imaginary is one of my favorite things to talk about because it's massively important when mastering communication. You can imagine it as this massive database of all human experiences, of all human information. And humans around the world, specifically adults, heavily rely on the collective imaginary to better communicate and to more efficiently communicate. Just to give you an example of how powerful this collective imaginary can be, especially in this day and age of worldwide information, if I say something that is, again, fragrance related, but if I say something like, this fragrance smells like Italy, even if you have never been to Italy, you kind of know what I'm talking about. And the crazy thing is that all these assumptions that you may be having are based on what you've been watching in movies, reading in books, or just generally being told. It's crazy how we can easily pull information from all these medias and all these stories and just reconstruct a feeling, a vibe, and even a smell. It's crazy how it's so core to our communication, yet so overlooked. Before we go on, I just want to give you another couple of examples of this. So the first time I visited Venice Beach in LA, I was completely floored because it felt like I've been there. I've seen it so much in movies and TV and video games and everything that when I was there, it felt familiar. And yet I have never been there. It's insane. I could have spoken about the vibes and the feelings and the smells of Venice Beach without even being there. It's absolutely insane. Another interesting example that I always teach in my classes is if I say something like, that summer at my grandmother's, everyone is imagining something. And the crazy thing is that a lot of our thoughts, align in many ways, because that summer at my grandmother's, that statement there implies so many things that we take for granted that it's absolutely insane. First of all, it was summer, so we probably would have been out of school. Second of all, we would have been wearing shorts and maybe a t-shirt because it's, again, summer. Also, grandmothers are alive when we're kids, so probably it's about kids. And it's also the way it's spelled, that summer. So it's not one summer, it's not a summer, it's that summer. So we're gonna probably associate it to some sort of a life-changing event. Again, there's so much information in a statement like that. And a lot of these experiences, a lot of these details of these experiences may be in common between you and I, because ultimately we live in the same society. And by the way, I have to really put in a parenthesis here, because different cultures and different societies may have drastically different experiences. I'm talking to a more Western-leaning audience, and I have to take that into account. I also have to take into account that grandmothers from Italy may be different from grandmothers from England, or grandmothers from the US, or from Portugal, or even from Asia. And that's absolutely a factor. But the interesting thing is that despite all these micro differences, these images that are conveyed through words and even smells sometimes are very much aligned. They're very, very compatible. And that's why we can watch the same movies. That's why we can read the same books and still understand them and still communicate. So this whole tangent here on the collective imaginary is there to showcase basically that we do associate certain smells, certain colors, certain vibes to certain seasons. And it's completely fine to just want to embrace that because it's natural. I would not want to smell like pumpkin pie in the heat of the summer. I'd rather smell like pumpkin pie in the fall, just because it's more natural. It just suits the scenery, it suits the vibes. And that is absolutely normal. And that is a very, very strong argument for seasonality in fragrances. And it's not necessarily a case of manufacturers wanting to produce the most fragrance possible to get you to buy most fragrance possible and to get you to rotate fragrances as the fashion goes and as the season goes. Put yourself in the head of a perfumer for a moment. You're tasked with designing a fragrance, you're given a loose brief, and you're just kind of trying to piece things together. Obviously, what you will be referencing is stuff that happened in your life. And again, imaginary collective or collective imaginary comes into play again, because you're going to be referencing times, you're going to be referencing seasons, you're going to be referencing people, you're just going to be referencing events. And those events occur during a specific season with many other details that really help convey that image. And if the perfumer did a good job, when you do smell the fragrance, you're going to be transported to that season. And naturally, you're going to just want to kind of align it, and you're going to want to wear it with that season. Another huge factor to consider when talking about fragrance seasonalities is the fragrance tone range. I touch upon this in almost every review, and I say stuff like the fragrance sits in the mid-tone, it sits in a high tone, it sits in the base. When I'm talking about this stuff, I'm basically comparing a fragrance, maybe even a piece of the fragrance, or maybe even a note, to a specific frequency in the audible tonal range. I feel that referencing audible tonal range is fairly straightforward. All of you must be fairly accustomed to concepts like bass and highs and mids in music. And really comparing fragrances to that gives you a sort of a vibe. This vibe in my head is kind of based on fragrance vibration or energy and just general clarity. So for example, when talking about bright citruses, I would definitely tend to put those notes in the high part of the tone range just because they vibrate intensely. They have a lot of energy, they have a lot of zing, they have a lot of brightness to them. Again, I said bright citruses. On the other hand, when I'm talking about vanillas or ambers, these scents tend to sink lower in the tone range just because they're heavy, they're dense. Imagine them as like a note on a bass guitar. It's very ringy, very dense, very rumbly. It just like permeates the space. And in the same way, again, they smell dense. They smell like a fog. They're not really energy transmitting. They're more relaxing. And just overall, they just sit low like a fog, like a dense fog. And yes, we could be relegating certain notes to certain parts of the tone range, but it's not that simple. In my upcoming review for Amouage Outlands, the citruses in there are very candied. They're very sugary. They're very heavy. And they tend to sit lower in the tone range. Imagine it, again, you can imagine it as a frequency in audio or just like weight. Fresh note is very light and airy. It evaporates fast. That's also very, very crucial. Stuff that is high in the tone range tends to evaporate fast. It tends to give you this smell of lightness, smell of airiness, smell of freshness. Stuff that sits lower in the tone range tends to evaporate very, very slowly and has this thick, resinous, viscous, syrupy type of feeling. Again, vanillas, ambers, resins, maybe even ouds. All this stuff is very, very heavy in the body. So basically combining these two factors, the collective imaginary and the tonal range, and using these two concepts to kind of like deconstruct the fragrance will allow you to sort of place it in a specific season, and it will come very, very naturally. Now, again, you can absolutely wear whatever you want, whenever you want. Some people like to wear, for example, fresh fragrances in winter just because of the contrast. Contrast is beautiful. I even mentioned before in my fragrance rotation section that I've been wearing Acqua Viva because it's very, very zingy. And yes, there's sun out, it's a little bit warm, but warm is relative. I mean, we're still hovering around the freezing conditions. And I'm wearing Acqua Viva just because it brings me to summer prematurely. It has this beautiful contrast effect with the snow that's still outside. But what about four-season wears? What about signature scent worthy fragrances, you may ask? Well, those fragrances usually tend to sit in the middle of the tonal range, and they tend to not have a very distinct imagery connected to the fragrance. So they are a lot more compatible, a lot more flexible in terms of interpretation. Sometimes they're very abstract in concept, not really allowing you to pin them to a specific season. Some other times they're just incredibly compatible. So for example, if I have something like a light woody scent, you might take the lightness and reference it in the summer in your mind, and you might take the woody aspect and reference it in the winter, and just kind of make it fit all year round. That's absolutely fine. I actually really like the idea of four-season wears just because they're so compromised by design. Compromises and limitations fuel creativity and innovation, and I love that process. A perfumer that is out there to design a four-season scent really has to think hard and clear about what they're doing. I love that. I love that intentionality. I know we're barely scratching the surface of this massive conversation. There's so much more to talk about, but we can't sit here forever. So let me just close this off by giving you a couple pointers. My main point is just not to overthink fragrance seasonality. Do not worry about it. Wear what feels natural. Wear what feels appropriate. That is the easiest way to approach this whole endeavor. When watching YouTube, fortunately or unfortunately, you're going to be faced with a lot of seasonal lists. Take these with a grain of salt. It's not that the influencer is trying to be schemy or evil, trying to get you to spend money on a seasonal basis. It's just that it's really, really easy to package things according to the collective imaginary. They're just leveraging that without probably even knowing it. They're just thinking, hey, it's fall. What smells like fall? What is cool in fall? What could people wear in fall? And they just present it. And as I said before, do not feel obligated to follow these trends because again, you can wear whatever you want, whenever you want, as long as it feels appropriate and natural to you. Some people tend to be a little bit scared or just resistant to wear heavy fragrances in summer. I'm one of those people. In my reviews for fragrances that are heavy or maybe ambery or vanilla or gourmand, I tend to recommend not to wear them in summer. But again, that is just my opinion. That is just my recommendation. If you're like me, if you like my same type of fragrances, you might not like wearing those fragrances in summer just because of the way they work with temperature. Temperature is also another thing to consider when wearing fragrances seasonally. It's not that important in my opinion. It's way less important than people give it credit for, but it does affect the way the fragrance develops and evaporates. And that evaporation is ultimately what gives you the smell. It gives you the projection. So if you're wearing a very heavy fragrance in summer, it might evaporate too fast, being a little bit overwhelming and overbearing and cloying. For example, that's what happens on my skin in the summer with vanilla heavy fragrances and gourmands in general. I personally will continue to reference seasonality in my reviews just because I see it more as a guideline. Obviously, you don't have to follow guidelines, you can do whatever you want. But with these guidelines, I'm actually referencing and leveraging the collective imaginary to really convey a message. If I say that a fragrance is more suited towards winter, you know what I'm talking about. It doesn't mean that you have to wear it in winter, you can wear it whenever you want. But knowing that it's suited for winter, knowing that it sits in the base of the tonal range gives you an idea of how it will wear and how heavy it is. Just to close this off, don't take marketing and guidelines too seriously. They're just there to convey a message. They're just there to communicate what the fragrance is like and how it could potentially wear. You can do whatever you want. You're absolutely free to do whatever you want. Contrast is amazing. I like wearing fresh fragrances in the winter just because they really mix with the freezing air here and they almost convey a mentholated aspect. At the same time, I do like wearing some heavy fragrances in the summer because I do feel that certain notes really evolve and bloom in the summer. But again, this is just my experience, and you might want to consult the perfumer's recommendation, the creator's recommendation, the brand's recommendation to know how the fragrance has been designed, and then adapt it to your needs, adapt it to your taste, adapt it to what feels natural to you. If you like this type of content, if you like my approach to video, feel free to subscribe. It's always massively appreciated and it helps the channel. If you want to interact with me, leave a comment, suggestion, opinion, or anything else down below. I always reply and I always keep the conversation open. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your time. It's never taken for granted. Many more videos to come, many more fun ideas to talk about. Until next time, see ya and cheers.